Welcome to the Sevalla Masterclass, and in this video we are going to cover some of the critical points of any business, which is security, monitoring and performance. And if you have been following along, you have seen how easy it is to deploy applications on Sevalla, deploy databases, static sites, object storage, any kind of modern computing needs on Sevalla. But deploying is just the beginning. Keeping your applications secure, monitored, and performing optimally is where the real work begins. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to implement enterprise-grade security, set up comprehensive monitoring, and optimize your applications for peak performance on Sevalla. So let's start with the foundations. Understanding how Sevalla approaches security is important because Sevalla operates on a shared responsibility model. Let me break it down for you. Sevalla handles the infrastructure security, which consists of network security, physical data center security, and underlying platform security. But you, as a developer, are responsible for your application security and user management and content security. This is actually great news because it means you have full control over your security posture, while Sevalla handles the heavy lifting of infrastructure security. The first thing, let's talk about roles and permissions. Right? We are not talking about who can log in, but the security model that scales with your team. Sevalla offers several user roles, and understanding the application of each role can make it easy for you to maintain the security of your applications. So at the top, you have the company owner. Now, this is the person who created your company and who onboarded everyone. And the condition for this is there can be only one company owner per company, and they have the ultimate authority. They can transfer ownership and they can also request for account closure. So you can think of it as the root access for Linux, right? So you should use it sparingly. You should not make anyone the owner of any company. The next level, we have admins. Now, company administrators, they have the complete control of all company data and they have full access to all the services. So only give this level of access to users you completely trust. And lastly, you have developers. Now, developers is an interesting role because they can manage all services and DNS, and they can also manage service level users. But the one thing they cannot change is the billing related information, which is very critical and should only be accessible by admins and owners and people in the management role. So this is perfect for your development team leads who need operational access, but they should not be able to spin up expensive resources. Then you also have service level users. Now, these roles are typically intended for people like static site administrators or application administrators or database administrators. And these users will only have access to specific services they've been assigned. Oh, that's pretty much all about different types of users and permissions. Let's do one thing. Let's go to our Sevalla dashboard and we can take a look at the user permissions in our dashboard. Let's go to the user management tab in our application dashboard and click on invite users. Let's go to our company settings, and here we can click on users. And when you click on invite users, here we can see by default, since I created this company, I am the company owner. And apart from that, we have different roles. We have company administrator, which I can invite someone for, which will have all the access to all the services and all the billing information. Then there is company developers who will have access to the services, DNS, etc., but they will not have access to billing related information. Then there is company billing. They will have only access to company billing related information so that you can invite your accountants, your accounts department, etc. to this level of role. Same way, we have also service level users. If you want to only assign certain users to a certain service, let's say you want to invite a user who will only have access to our object storage. So this is how you can manage your roles and permissions. The next thing that I want to talk about, since we are talking about security, is our two-factor authentication. Here we have a two-factor authentication. By default, when you first create your Sevalla account, email authentication becomes your default two-factor authentication. You'll get a one-time verification code, sent to your email address, and using that you can have your two-factor authentication. But for production environments, I strongly recommend you should switch to an app level authentication, something like Google Authenticator. For that, you can enable this and you can scan this QR code in one of your authenticator apps, something like Google Authenticator, and it will give you a code which you can type here and finally click on verify. So every time you're trying to do some security related task, something like login into a new device, etc., it will ask you for the same code from the same authenticator app, which is more secure than sending an OTP to your email. So this is one of the other major security features that you should take advantage of. Enable two-factor security authentication using an app, something like Google Authenticator. The next thing in security that we have already seen is the allow list. If you go to any application and you go to networking, here you have a couple of options available. One of them is IP restrictions. So if you want, if it is a critical web application which only your company users or some users should have access to, then you can enable IP based restrictions so that you can allow a particular number of IPs who can access this application, or you can block some people from accessing this application. Another security feature that you should be aware of: for databases, you don't have to worry. If you are using internal networking or private networking, then by default that database is not exposed to the outside world. Only your applications can access that using an internal connection by adding them here. Okay. That's pretty much all the security features that you should keep in mind. Next up, let's move to monitoring and analytics. This is where you transform from just deploying your applications to actually understanding and optimizing them. Now, when we go to any application and we click on analytics, we have what we call as application level analytics. There is another one which is called company level analytics, which we'll get back to later on. But let's take a look at the application level analytics that you should be aware of. Now, application level analytics, they show you memory usage, the CPU usage, the HTTP requests, the responses, how much time they are taking, how many requests that you are getting per minute, and you can view data up to 30 days, which is the maximum parameter that we have available here, and the minimum amount is last 1 hour. Here, if you take a look at the memory monitoring, this shows you the average total RAM used per selected time. Right? This is what you need to know. If your application is consistently using most or all available memory, then Sevalla recommends upgrading to a pod with more memory. So if you are using S1 and you're constantly seeing this level being here, then you should go from S1 to something like S2. Right? That's what you need to remember. The same way for CPU, this shows you the average CPU utilization as a percentage of your instances resources. If we are consistently seeing a very high CPU usage, so let's say something like 100%, then you have a few options. First, you can upgrade to a pod with more CPU, or if your application is stateless, you can enable horizontal scaling for that. Because automatic horizontal scaling is very powerful. When CPU usage hits 80% of your current pods, then Sevalla automatically spins off additional instances of your application up to a maximum limit so that your application stays responsive during these spikes. So if you want to enable horizontal scaling, then you can come here, go to settings, and there is a button here for horizontal scaling, and you can select the minimum amount of instances and the maximum amount of instances that you want Sevalla to allow. Now, going back to analytics, we also have instance count. This shows you exactly how many instances are running for each process. This is important for understanding your scaling patterns and costs. One thing you should remember is you are only billed for the time your instance is actually running. The same way, we also have network monitoring, which shows you requests per minute and response time. The requests per minute, it shows you the average requests per minute for all HTTP requests, and this will help you understand your traffic patterns and plan for scaling if you need that. But the actual valuable thing here is the slowest request table. If you take a look at this, this shows you the slowest request of your application in the descending order. So the request which took the most amount of time, this was from earlier when we were testing our file management application. The upload API took the most amount of time, which makes sense because uploading a file is a heavy operation and it is supposed to take more time than most of the APIs. But looking at this table, you can understand your systems, you can understand which APIs are taking more time, and if it is something unusual. Because in my case, this is usual, this is expected, upload is supposed to take more time. But if you see something which is taking more than 1000 milliseconds, you can take a more deeper look and investigate why it is taking so much time. We also have company level analytics. Here you can get a very high level overlook about how your spending patterns has been in the current billing period, right? So that you have a fair idea about how much cost you are incurring and how much bill you will have in the next billing period. One thing you can do is setting up monitoring alerts. Now, Sevalla does not have built-in alerting, but they do provide deployment notifications. So you can enable email notifications for deployment failures in your user settings. We go here, user settings and notifications. So since we have enabled this, every time we get a failed deployment, we'll get an email saying that one of our deployments have been failed. The next thing that I want to talk about is how to basically optimize the performance of your applications. So the first thing about performance optimization is choosing the right resources. Now, Sevalla offers different pod sizes for different workloads, and choosing the right size of pod can impact both performance and cost. For example, let's say you are creating a new application and it is a web process. If you open the resources tab, you have a lot of options available, starting from hobby tier to standard to CPU optimized to memory optimized. One thing to keep in mind again is if you go with hobby tier, you cannot use custom domains. So that is one limitation. But for production, you'll anyway want something from standard or memory optimized or CPU optimized, depending on what kind of application that you are running and whether you understand your application to that level or not. This is how you should think about pod selection. CPU optimized pods are great for compute intensive applications. So things like image processing, data analysis, or complex algorithms. If you have something like this, then you should definitely be going for CPU optimized pods. Memory optimized pods are perfect for applications that cache a lot of data in memory or process large data sets, which involves things like chunking and rate limiting, etc. And if you have neither of those, then you can go for standard pods, which work well for typical web applications with the fair amount of compute and memory requirements. Now, when talking about scaling, as we have already talked about, Sevalla offers two different kinds of scaling. One is the vertical scaling, which basically means if you have S1 and it is not enough, then you can go ahead and select something like S2 or something like S5 if you have the budget for that. That is called vertical scaling, which means you have an existing instance and you're just increasing the power and the capacity of the instance vertically. So that's why it's called vertical scaling. The same way, horizontal scaling means you are keeping S1 resources only for your application, but instead of running one instance of your application, you will try to run multiple instances of your application. But for that, you have to keep in mind that your application has to be stateless, which means that two different requests do not affect each other. They are completely stateless. Then only you can go for this architecture, which is horizontal scaling. If you want that, you can enable this from here. And here you'll have to make a choice. The minimum amount of instances that you want to be running. Let's say I want at least 2 instances to be running all the time. It does not matter how low my traffic is. And the second thing that you have to decide is the maximum amount of instances that you want to run. Which means that if you get a traffic spike, your CPU level goes 80%. Then up to how many instances that you want Sevalla to create. Because of course, if you have a spike with millions of users, which is not very likely, and you have allowed, let's say 20 instances, then Sevalla will create 20 instances of your application if that's what it needs. Because if all your instances are getting 80% of CPU utilization. But if you have only selected 5, then it will not go beyond 5. So that your cost is limited. Even though your applications might crash because of the overload, but your cost will stay limited. So you have to think about your budget, you have to think about your user behavior, you have to think about your user traffic, and a lot of things before you decide your scaling strategies. Now, before we wrap up this video, another thing that I want to talk about is the enterprise grade security features that I mentioned at the start of this video. And compliance is one of them. Sevalla is SOC 2 type compliant, which means that they have been independently audited for security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. So compliance, when you say that you are SOC 2 type compliant, which means that an external agency, an external physical agency, we are not talking about some software, an external agency have been involved in Sevalla's infrastructure. They have personally verified that they adhere to things like user privacy and the infrastructure availability, the security, how they handle sensitive data of users, and all these different things. And they have given them a stamp of approval that yes, you are following all these practices. So you can say that you are SOC 2 compliant. If you need Sevalla's SOC 2 report for your own compliance requirements, you can request access through their trust report page. This is important for enterprise customers who need to demonstrate their vendor's security posture. So again, remember the shared responsibility model where Sevalla handles the infrastructure security and compliance, but you are responsible for your application security and your data handling